Hi, everybody. This is fun to be here today, and I love what Skip, the background he gave on this fabulous building. And when I had Vanessa's job, the Spaghetti Warehouse put a restaurant here. Does anybody remember that? And so really, their efforts, they brought us in and worked with our group and gave us the proceeds from one of their first nights of opening. So it was really fun to be there. And it's great what it is today. So it's an honor to be here. On behalf of the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program, Main Street, Arkansas, and the Department of Arkansas Heritage, I'd like to thank the Clinton School of Public Service for inviting us to celebrate 30 years of Main Street, Arkansas. Now, before I introduce today's speakers, I want to ask all the Main Street staff and any local Main Street representatives to please stand. Yeah. You local folks are the ones that are in the trenches. You are the ones that are really making the difference day to day, and we so appreciate your work. So today we're here to look at the Main Street movement on a national, state, and local level. To accomplish this, we are honored to have Patrice Frey, who's the CEO of the National Main Street Center, Greg Phillips, who's the director of Main Street, Arkansas, and Meredith Bergston, who is the executive director of Main Street, Siloam Springs. There she is. I'm going to introduce the speakers, and then they can come up and give their presentations. Patrice is the president and CEO of the National Main Street Center, where she oversees the center's work, offering technical assistance, research, advocacy, and education and training opportunities for Main Street's network of approximately 1,100 communities around the country. Based in Chicago, the National Main Street Center is a subsidiary of the National Trust for Historic Preservation and has participated in the renewal of more than 2,000 older commercial districts in its 30-year history. Before joining the National Main Street Center in May of 2013, which I digress a minute because you came to Arkansas your first day at work, and you went up to Northwest Arkansas in May and it snowed. That was so crazy. So we're glad you came back, and I think we have a better day today. Anyway, she has been there, as I said, since May 2013. Patrice served as the Director of Sustainability for the National Trust for Historic Preservation, where she oversaw the Trust's efforts to promote the reuse and greening of older and historic buildings. She has worked in the fields of community development and urban research. She's a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania's program in historic preservation, where she received a master's degree in preservation planning and a certificate in real estate design and development through the Penn School of Design and the Wharton Business School. So we'll hear from Patrice in a minute. Now, Greg Phillips has been the director of the Main Street program, and I have a blank here because I meant to ask you, is it 4 years? Thank you. December of 2012. But he's been with Main Street, Arkansas as the assistant director since 1997, so he's been with us for a long time. He received his Bachelor of Arts degree at Ouachita Baptist University and is a graduate of the University of Central Arkansas's Community Development Institute. He has completed the Arkansas Governmental Manager Program, the Arkansas Certified Public Manager Program, and the Arkansas Certified Volunteer Manager Program. You're a very certified young man. Meredith is the Executive Director of Main Street, Siloam Springs, which is a long way from here, and we appreciate you coming today. But she was raised in Kenya, which, obviously she's not exactly a native of Siloam Springs. After moving to the town in 2005 as a John Brown University student, she fell in love with the community. Its beautiful outdoors and sense of opportunity that she saw. So she stayed around, earned her degree in 2008. She worked as the marketing and communication manager for United Way in Northwest Arkansas. But then, in 2011, she became the first full-time executive director of the Main Street Siloam Springs program. In January of 2014, Meredith received Main Street Arkansas's peer-nominated Outstanding Director Award, which is really a great achievement, and we're proud of you. So before Patrice takes the stage, we'd like to show you a video that we produced to celebrate our 30th anniversary.
As each of our communities become more homogenized, downtowns represent that thing that is very unique about each one of our cities. When you go to a community and you are looking for that unique, the essence of who they are, where they came from, typically you're going to find much of that in the downtown.
I happen to think that every city's downtown has a story to tell, and ultimately the story of that city and that destination lives within its historic structure, its historic downtown, and ultimately in reclaiming those historic buildings.
We've seen a tremendous impact because of the resources and support that we get from Main Street Arkansas. It's incredible to think of the impact that they're having, not just on downtowns, but really on quality of life, on economic development, and innovation across the state of Arkansas.
Over the last 4 to 5 years, our downtown in Rogers has gone from vacancy rates in the 60% to occupancy rates in the upper 90%. And that's in no small part due to our affiliation with Main Street Arkansas.
We work with 29 cities across Arkansas, and we provide them with all sorts of services. We provide organizational and technical assistance to the local boards and the directors. We provide small business assistance. We are actually the only state program that has an interior designer and a small business consultant and an exterior designer on our staff. So we're very, very fortunate to provide the tools to the folks that we're working with so that they can be successful in the work that they're doing.
The direction they give us, along with the guidelines of the National Main Street Center, lay the groundwork for a successful organization. When you look at how we work the 4-point approach in our communities, using that holistic approach to downtown development has been incredibly important. And they have always been there. They've always had my back.
When you have these prospects that you're bringing through town, and they're looking at investing millions and millions of dollars oftentimes, and they want to see what that downtown, what the historic downtown area looks like. And if it's viable, and you see that hustle and bustle of business and commerce, it's a message to investors that their investment's going to be protected, that we have a sustainable community that is standing the test of time.
One of the real successes of Main Street Arkansas is that in the past few decades, where preservation was not even seen as a positive component to economic development, Main Street Arkansas and the advocates that support preservation have established preservation as an essential component to economic development.
When my own personal office building caught on fire last year, devastating fire in a 100-year-old building that we housed our headquarters, it was Main Street that came to me and said, you need to get tax credits on this run. You really need to explore it. That's very significant when you're talking about these tax credits of 20 and 25% return on investment. It can be the tipping point on whether or not you can make a project cash flow or not. So I really appreciate that. And that's something that I really can't thank them enough for.
There's something about a revitalized physical structure that brings a level of energy to a place. And it's appealing, it's magnetic.
I love going into a community where there's excitement and there are things happening. People are moving downtown, new businesses are opening.
A great coffee shop, a great bookstore, a good place to shop, a good street scene, a great bench to sit on and watch people walk by. I think it's a fun way to spend time.
The work of the Department of Arkansas Heritage wouldn't be nearly as rich and wonderful if it weren't for the Main Street Arkansas program. They do incredible work and help us move the whole state forward in a way that cherishes the work of our ancestors and prepares the way for future generations.
Well, the bottom line is that we would not be where we are today without our close relationship to Main Street Arkansas. This relationship has lasted over decades, and it has produced good works and works that I think you can drive through our downtown today and see on every corner the benefits of the relationship between the City of Rogers and Main Street Arkansas.
Well, thank you, Missy, and thank you, Greg, for the invitation to be here. And that was a spectacular video. What did a really terrific job of summarizing the terrific accomplishments of Main Street Arkansas over the last 30 years. So I feel honored to be here. It's a privilege to be with you all again. As Missy mentioned, I started my very first day at the National Main Street Center was here in Arkansas, and yes, it did snow, and it was early May, and that was unexpected. And yet, there's another reason that I have to share with you all why I came back, why I was so compelled to come back. Is anybody from Rogers here? All right. Well, so imagine my great delight as someone who has seen the movie A Christmas Story maybe 35 times, because my father is absolutely obsessed with it, right? Absolutely. So imagine my delight to discover that the air rifles are made right here in Rogers, Arkansas. And even better than that was that the Mayor Hines, as you saw in the video, presented me with my very own. So how could I not accept an invitation to come back? So I have to say, so far, Arkansas is the only state that's presented me with a firearm as a welcome gift. I do set that out as a challenge to other Main Street programs. But anyway, I am excited to be with you today to reflect on the success of Main Street Arkansas over the last 30 years, and also to share with you a little bit about some of the major trends that I see affecting downtowns all across the country, whether they're rural downtowns, whether they're commercial districts and urban centers, like here in Little Rock, you have several of those. But because I know that we have an audience that isn't just Main Streeters, I wanted to just talk a little bit about what Main Street is first, although that video gave you a terrific flavor for it. But I think the idea of Main Street lives very large in the American psyche, right? That Main Streets are really the heart of a community, the center of commerce, but the center of a city's connectedness. So that of course is a very important element of Main Street. But when we talk about Main Street, we also talk about a methodology, which is an approach that has been time-tested and developed over many decades that helps communities take control of their own destinies and really bring prosperity back downtown. And we also really talk about Main Street as a network, which is a larger network of 2,500 people throughout the country who are really working towards this exact same goal, which is creating healthier downtowns. Now, a little bit later, Greg is going to share with you some of the specific success stories here in Arkansas, but just to give you a flavor of what the Main Street program has accomplished over the last 30 years throughout the country, we've seen during that time $60 billion of investment in America's downtowns and Main Street's downtowns. And that's a pretty impressive number if you stop to think that some of these are the most distressed communities in our country. We've also seen 500,000 net new jobs, developed during that same time. And we've seen 115,000 net new businesses. And of course, Main Street really has its roots in historic preservation. And what we care about is putting older and historic buildings back into use to bring economic prosperity downtown. And we've seen close to 250,000 buildings in our Main Street districts rehabilitated, which is a pretty impressive number. So that just gives you an overall sense of the Main Street program. And as I say, I want to talk about some of the major trends, the major influences, forces at work on our Main Street communities. And I'll tell you off the bat that some of these are really great news for downtown, and some of them are pretty challenging realities that we have to grapple with. But to do this, I want to start with something that is really quite good news, and that is that we're seeing Main Street style neighborhoods really thriving or beginning to thrive in many different places, and including many, many examples here in Arkansas. And I want to touch on some findings from a study that I think you'll find interesting this afternoon, which was called Older, Smaller, Better. This is a study of the Preservation Green Lab, which is really a research arm of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And what they did is they took basically what amounts to an old hypothesis, about 60 years old, and they put that to the test. So do you all know who this woman is up here? This is, yeah, exactly, Jane Jacobs, one of the great urbanists, of the 20th century. And of course, if you're not intimately familiar with her work, one of her, really her life's passion was helping people to understand the value of the older building stock all around us, and particularly that building stock's value in terms of creating affordable space for businesses, especially new businesses, small businesses, and for creating the kind of human scale environments that facilitate strong communities and a lot of social interaction. Of course, she was responding to a lot of what was going on in New York at the time, Robert Moses and the enormous urban renewal projects that were taking place during that time. So, of course, now we live in a time where we have incredible amounts of data and incredible amounts of mapping ability at our disposal. And so at the time, I worked at the Preservation Green Lab when this project was being generated. And at the time we thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting if we put many of her sort of ideas about the value of older buildings, especially Main Street style buildings, Main Street style communities, put those to the test. And here's what we found. Here's what they found, I should say. They found that older mixed-use neighborhoods, particularly with a dense historic core, have a significantly higher walk score and a significantly higher transit score. That means that for people like you and me, it's much easier to walk around, take care of your daily needs on foot. That's a big thing because we'll talk a little bit more about this, but that there's more and more demand for that walkability. We also found that young people love old buildings. Now, I should mention that this study looked at older neighborhoods in Seattle, DC, and Seattle, DC, and San Francisco. And I'll explain a little bit at the end about why I still think that's relevant to smaller communities. But if you look at a city and you look at where historic buildings are concentrated, you see that the median age in those places is actually lower, that there's like this magnetic quality between old places and younger people. And that's an important thing from an economic competitiveness point of view. So they did some creative things with cell phone data, which is they looked at or more like where people were using their cell phones on a Saturday night or a Sunday night, or a Friday night rather. And what they found is that overwhelmingly the map lights up in areas with older and historic buildings. That's where there tends to be the best nightlife, the best evening time activity. Now, this is a really important point as well because we talk about the new knowledge economy, the new creative economy, and what the study also found is that in places with a mixture of older and newer buildings, that there were significantly more likely to house jobs that are in the creative economy, whether that's theater or architecture firms, tech startups, that kind of thing. So again, really a good, speaking to the overall quality of these older buildings and their ability to especially incubate newer businesses. Now, for those of us who care a lot about equity and equality issues, there were interesting findings that older buildings tend to have more minority-owned businesses, more women-owned businesses, and also that more new businesses tend to be in these spaces. Again, speaking to the affordability of these places and their ability to incubate small and minority-owned businesses. And then finally, the last major finding I wanted to share with you was about the overwhelming preponderance of non-chain non-chain businesses in these places. And that's important because we know that when you shop in a chain, when you go to Subway and you spend $7 on your sandwich, a lot of that money ends up flowing back to wherever Subway is headquartered. If you go to, Al's Deli, on the other hand, those dollars stay local, and that has a very important local economic impact. And again, we see that connection between older Main Street style buildings and economic activity. So you might think, well, this is DC, this is San Francisco, Seattle, congratulations, we know these places are hot. What about other kinds of cities, other kinds of places? And I was reflecting about the time that I spent here in Arkansas now a year and a half ago, and I have to say I saw pieces of this in every single place I visited, whether it was Salem or Rogers, Russellville, Soma here in Little Rock. There's no question that these places are walkable, right? They may not be dense urban in the sense of New York City dense urban, but they are dense urban centers, and that's a lot to build on. There's also more and more young people that are flocking to these places or that are gravitating back to these places. And I think, again, not to use Salem as the constant example here, but it is the one that I'm most familiar with in your state. I mean, this is a terrific story of a lot to do with the university, folks coming to university and deciding that, hey, this is a pretty special place to live. There's a very high quality of life here, and investing in that place, deciding to stay, and that's a major positive thing that we see happening. And then we also see small business making the exact same decision, whether it's a coffee shop opening up downtown instead of on a highway, whether it's Oxford American's great new concept restaurant and live entertainment venue that they've opened up over on South of Main. We see businesses again and again making the decision to locate downtown rather than on the urban fringe. So I say this to really tee it up as I think that there are some very, very positive things going on as it relates to Main Street style neighborhoods. So the second thing I wanted to talk about today is related to housing. And one of my great surprises taking the Main Street job was showing up in smaller rural communities all across the country and seeing that there is absolutely a downtown housing boom happening in smaller places, in smaller cities, in towns, and even villages all across the country. Urban housing, not just an urban New York, Seattle, Chicago phenomenon. We're seeing profound changes in consumer preference. National Association of Realtors has done some recent work where 60%, they find that 60% of people now are looking for mixed-use neighborhoods. 80% say sidewalks and places to walk are really important. This is really a cataclysmic change from what we've seen for future generations. Two groups in particular are behind this, not exclusively, but they're certainly driving a lot of it. Baby boomers, I think this is at the Woodstock 30th anniversary, having a good time, and millennials. And these are two groups that are voting with their feet. Often in the case of baby boomers, they're deciding they don't want to deal with cleaning up their yards and maintaining a large house, and they'd rather move downtown. And we're seeing that with millennials, who this is a generation that is getting their driver's license more later in life than any other previous generation. It's because they're doing things like investing in their cell phones and going out with their friends, and they don't care so much about the car. They want to be able to walk where they're going. So again, I was going to chat about how the great rural downtown housing boom that I've seen in Siloam Springs, but there are many other examples, both in-state and out-of-state. What I do want to share with you in more detail, though, I'm sorry it's not showing up completely on this image, but these were some numbers that the state of North Carolina calculated, because they wanted to understand if you added just one unit of residential housing to a downtown, what kind of economic impact does that generate? And you can see that if you between $400 a month and $1,200 a month in rent at the low and the high end, that adds between $7,800 and close to $19,000 to a downtown economy. So from my perspective, one of the most exciting things about the housing issue is you don't need to add 200 units of downtown housing to your town of 3,000 people. You can start to see some pretty impressive impacts when you've added, 10, 20, 30. That starts to create a critical mass for other things, a catalytic effect for other things to begin happening downtown. So the other piece that I wanted to touch on today is financing changing. We recently did a study, a survey asking our Main Street managers, what's the biggest issue you're facing? And overwhelmingly, it was empty buildings that nobody had the cash to rehabilitate. You heard Ron Drake talk about in the video, talk about the use of tax credits and how important those were for rehabilitating his own house, and I know he's used those in other projects as well. And we know that we are living in an environment where tax credits are an endangered species, particularly at the federal level, but that is certainly true at the state level as well. Although I think you all have been more fortunate than some other states who have lost them in recent years. National Trust Community Investment Corporation is a sister subsidiary of the National Main Street Center. They're working very hard to help Congress understand the important economic benefits of federal historic tax credits. I would encourage you to let me know if you're interested in being part of that effort. We need as many folks signing on in support as we can. They're also working hard to make these tax credits more usable for smaller projects, because a lot of times what we see is the cost of doing business. If you're looking at a project under $5 million, it just doesn't pencil to use the tax credit, and that's a very disappointing thing. All right, another just quick thing that I wanted to mention, and this is more on the good news side of things, and that is how many of you are familiar with New Markets tax credits? Great, okay, well this is another source of funding that has traditionally been a bit difficult for Main Streets to take advantage of, for Main Street type developers to take advantage of, because they are targeted more towards larger projects. However, we're working with NTCIC. They're working to develop a small deal fund, which would essentially, we hope, put these tax credits in range of smaller Main Street style buildings. So it would be a small deal fund to get started with. The application is in, and we're certainly hoping that they will get an allocation of tax credits for this special project. Now, another thing, which is this one is particularly exciting because we don't have to rely on anyone in Congress or anyone in state government to make this happen, and that is crowdsourcing and the idea of crowdfunding. And I know that crowdfunding at this point is, if not an old concept, at least a well-known concept, but I did want to just highlight a couple that I thought were particularly, a couple approaches that I thought were particularly meaningful and have a lot of potential for Main Streets. And that is, to give you one example, there are a handful of developers out there who are starting to do crowdsourced fundraising for real estate development. And so this is a group called Fundrise. They're based in DC, although they've done work in a lot of different states. And you can see the great example of a project that they rehabilitated on H Street, DC, which is also a main street. And what is really exciting about this is they'll come in on projects that are often small scale and so beneath the notice of many developers, or might otherwise be swept up and demolished as part of a larger development project. And they'll, from crowdsourcing, will raise the funds to close the equity gap on a building like this. So it means that people like you and me can have $100 and invest in this building and really be part of the redevelopment of our own neighborhoods. I think that's an incredibly exciting thing. They also crowdsourced the use of this. I think they asked the neighborhood what they wanted, and the neighborhood wanted a sushi restaurant. I think that's what it is now. So exciting stuff, and I think we'll see more of this to come. I also wanted to just mention to you another example of how crowdsourced funding is put to use in exciting ways in Main Street communities, and that is there's a group called IOB, which is somehow short for in your backyard instead of not in your backyard. And they do really great work in terms of helping organizations raise funding for everything from streetscape improvements to community gardens. What's different about them is they actually work with really groups of students, if you will, all at once, take them through a training program, help them understand how to really create a successful online fundraising campaign, and they've had tremendous results. So we're eager to begin working with them a little bit later in the year, or early into 2015. Okay, I'm trying to go fast because I think I'm getting to the end of my time. But trend number 4, this is another really cool, exciting thing, and that is this idea of placemaking. So placemaking, quite simply, means lots of different definitions, but the idea behind it is how do you take control over some of the public spaces in your midst and put them to use in a way that really facilitates community interaction, brings people outside where they might normally, just not bother. And the whole premise behind placemaking, which is a concept that's been around as long as Main Street itself, 35 years, but is really enjoying a resurgence. The whole concept is that there is so much we can do in our communities that's lighter, quicker, and cheaper. And I'm showing you a couple of examples that are from big cities, but don't let that deter you if you live or care about smaller communities, because there's no reason these kind of things can't be done in smaller places. So the first, of course, is Times Square, New York, where somebody thought, hey, let's just throw a bunch of lawn chairs out and see what happens. Now, this is at the beginning of the day, but I'm told that it was quite successful, and that, the sort of novelty, and, it's just kind of cool to be sitting in the middle of Main Street, or in the middle of Times Square, hanging out, makes people linger, maybe shop a little bit more than they normally would. And then there's a great example of the same kind of thing, which is in Detroit, where Southwest Airlines sponsored a beach in the middle of the city in Campus Martius. So they came in, dumped a bunch of sand in the middle of Campus Martius, and it was a beach for the summer. Now that's not quite so cheap. You may not be so lucky as to have Southwest Airlines offering to do that in your community, but really the sky is the limit in terms of the kind of things that can be done. In my home in Evanston, Illinois, earlier this summer, we had a Streets Alive festival, same concept, clear the streets. Tons of fun games for kids. The library bookmobile was out. There were a few vendors selling food, but really a great community event, provided a lot of additional shopping activity for merchants, which they were excited about. So again, lighter, cheaper, quicker. We talk about Main Street. A lot of progress is incremental and quite frankly slow, but there are things that you can do quickly to really make a difference in your community. The final thing I wanted to talk about is sustainability in Main Street, and that's a especially fitting topic since we're in the oldest LEED certified building in Arkansas. That was a good fun fact that I didn't know. We at the Preservation Green Lab, back when I worked with them, did some research looking at Main Street style buildings and energy usage, and what we found is that Main Street tenants and Main Street building owners tend to pay more on their utilities than any other kind of class of business owner or building owner. So to give you one quick example, I was in Water Valley, Mississippi about a month ago, was at a restaurant / market there, and found out that they were paying, I think it was like $27,000 a year on their utility bill, which is massive, absolutely massive. If you're a small business, that hurts. So the upside of that is with tremendous cost comes tremendous opportunity, because if we connect those businesses, those building owners, to retrofit solutions so they can save money, that's money that goes directly back in their pockets and can be used to reinvest in their businesses and in their communities. So we received a grant, the Preservation Green Lab did, from the Department of Energy, a $4 million grant, which is focused on investing in Main Street energy efficiency. I'll tell you right now, it's in the data gathering phase, which doesn't sound very exciting, but is super, super important, because it helps us understand how these buildings are performing and how we can offer solutions to building owners more effectively. So if you're interested in participating, I'd encourage you to, or having your community participate, encourage you to come up afterwards and let me know. I'd love to. And then finally, this is my last slide, I think, was just talking about all the energy I see here in Little Rock and in many other places throughout the country around sustainability, building commercial districts, main streets that are really focused on sustainability, local food, sustainably created products, like here at the Green Store in Soma. And that I think is another really exciting thing that we see, major trend that we see affecting main streets all throughout the country. So I hope you see this as mostly a positive story. I certainly do. I have such great hope for our main streets, and I again congratulate you for all of the great work that you're doing here in Arkansas, and thank you again for your offer to come and be with you today.
Well, thank you, Patrice, and thank you for being here to help us celebrate 30 years of Main Street Arkansas and our work throughout the state. As both Missy and Patrice alluded, she did spend her first days on the job last year here in Arkansas, touring several of our programs and meeting with local staff and volunteers. And I have to say, it's really been my pleasure over this last year and a half to get to know Patrice and work with her. And I am firmly convinced that the Main Street program nationwide is in fantastic hands under her leadership. So thank you for all you've done. As I hope you know by now, or maybe already knew, Main Street Arkansas is a historic, preservation-based community and economic development program. We started in 1984 with 5 pilot communities, and we currently serve 33 communities across Arkansas. We have 18 Main Street Arkansas communities and 15 Arkansas downtown communities that you'll see listed there on the list. I think we have many accomplishments over the past 30 years, but one of the ones that I think we're very proud of are the reinvestment statistics that our programs have reported back to us. Patrice gave you sort of the national look at that, and so I'd like to share some of our state numbers with you. Since 1984, we have seen over $155 million reinvested, both private and public dollars reinvested back into our downtowns. A little over 5,800 new jobs have been created, over 1,200 new businesses, 360 existing businesses that were operating somewhere else in the community decided to move into downtowns, and 564,000 volunteer hours been donated for downtown projects. We think these numbers are very impressive, and I hope you do too. And so if someone ever tells you, I mean, Main Street is a lot of things. Main Street is historic preservation, of course, community development, but if someone ever tells you Main Street is not economic development, that is not true. These numbers prove that. Another thing that we're very proud of is the national recognition that some of our programs have received over the years. The National Main Street Center awards the Great American Main Street Award to communities that exemplify the use of the Main Street approach in revitalization of their historic downtown and/or neighborhood business districts. And in Arkansas, we are very proud throughout the years that we have had 2 programs that have won this award, Main Street Rogers in 2004 and Main Street El Dorado in 2009. And I will just add, Patrice, I think it's time for a 3rd, okay? As we look toward the future, there are so many things on the horizon coming up, but one of the things that we are very excited about at Main Street Arkansas is that we will be hosting Destination Downtown, which is the South's premier downtown revitalization conference here in Little Rock, September 14th through 16th of next year. We partner with the Mississippi Main Street Association and the Louisiana Main Street program on this, and so I hope you all will write that date down and plan to join us here in Little Rock in September of next year. It's going to be a great conference. We are truly grateful for the people who have gone before us and were the trailblazers of downtown revitalization in Arkansas in the early years. At the same time, we are really excited about what the future holds for our program and for our downtowns across the state. There is so much going on, and we are fortunate to be a partner with our programs as they work to make their downtowns the place to live, work, and play in their community. At this time, it's my pleasure to ask Meredith Bergstrom, who is Executive Director of Main Street Siloam Springs, which is actually one of our newer Main Street programs, to share with you the difference that Main Street has made in her community. Meredith?
I'm so honored to be here. I'm going to take a minute and make sure I've adjusted this appropriately to my height. It's such an honor to be able to present in front of this crowd specifically, because these are the people that have so impacted our community and empowered us. So to be able to share directly with you, and then some of you that I don't know, the impact of that truly is an honor and a privilege. Siloam Springs Historic Downtown truly has an incredible story to tell. When I moved to Siloam Springs, I had always lived in big cities. Siloam, with its population of barely 15,000, with its one major highway, one university, and no mall or movie theater, was baffling to me. But as many college students do in Siloam Springs, I quickly found the downtown area. From the university, it was only 1 mile, and it was a walk through a park along a beautiful creekside trail. I found myself walking with friends and often running to and from downtown. At that time, vacant and underused buildings lined the historic downtown streetscape. Features like our beautiful Saker Creek running through town, our historic architecture, and the pedestrian-oriented sidewalks gave me and other visitors the impression of great potential, but lacked the ability to attract or sustain customers for any length of time. I enjoyed being downtown, but at the same time, I mourned that there seemed to be no life happening there. Thankfully, there were some professional businesses, a chiropractor's office, law offices, a dentistry, that kept Main Street alive for a while. But after 5, it might as well have been a ghost town. Now, of course, as I got into this work, I realized that this was a story that was sweeping across the nation, and it wasn't specific to Siloam Springs. But fast forward 9 years, and that is no longer our story, and that is no longer the story I know of many of your communities. That was in 2005, and today, in 2014, downtown Siloam Springs is bustling. We have 27 new shops, retail, restaurants, salons, and dance studios that have opened and are now sustaining their business in our downtown. They've added over 100 new jobs in our community. We've had over 15 significant rehabilitation and restoration building projects that have turned our vacant and underutilized buildings into vibrant commercial and residential spaces. We have 35 rentable apartment and loft units that are full of college students and young professionals. We estimate that over $10 million has been reinvested in our properties in building rehabilitation and public improvement projects. Walking through downtown, you'll find bikes tied to street signs and balcony poles. Hopefully we'll get bike racks soon. We have 2 coffee shops, a pizzeria, and 2 seasonal fine dining restaurants, providing culinary experiences that people previously drove 30 to 45 minutes outside of town to obtain. Our random alleyway is lush and colorful with carefully tended zinnias. On Saturdays, our farmers market pops up in City Park. In the evenings, people are outside on the sidewalk, dining at Cafe on Broadway, and taking their kids to dance classes. Our festivals and events are driving thousands of people downtown on weekends at least once a month, especially in the spring and summertime. And live music can be found somewhere downtown most days. So what happened? Of course, you know the answer is Main Street, Arkansas, and our local Main Street program, and a series of decisions that people that cared deeply about our community made that started a movement in our community. In 2008, Main Street Siloam Springs was a very small organization with about a $10,000 budget. We effectively functioned as a decorating committee during the holidays. By 2009, this group of people put their heads together and said, we need to do something different because our downtown is not thriving. They made application to Main Street Arkansas's Arkansas Downtown Network program, and this provided a set of goals and a direction that we desperately needed. In 2011, I was hired as the first full-time director of Main Street Siloam Springs, and by September of that year, we were a fully credited Main Street program. While Main Street Salem Springs was getting established, a pioneering couple opened the cafe on Broadway, and they stole a great idea from our history, and they decided to put retail in the base floor of the building and 2 apartments above. And this began a trend that has been very successful and helpful in our overall development story. Guided by the Main Street 4-point approach, which is about organization, design, promotion, and economic restructuring, we gathered our merchants and began building a sense of community that had not existed in our downtown for a long time. Our business owners and the entrepreneurs that were taking huge risks in buying and restoring buildings no longer felt that they were alone. By 2010, our organization had created a series of projects intended to spur business growth and fill vacancies. We had a 2-fold strategy. The first was to incentivize and encourage downtown restoration, and the second was to host events and promotions that would draw people into our downtown. With finally a clear vision to communicate to our investors, our Main Street budget grew from $50,000 in 2010 to $100,000 in 2012. This was with the help of corporate donations, event sponsorships, and project grants. We began a yearly facade grant program that allotted up to $1,000 in matching funds to 3 or more participants each year to restore or renovate their building exteriors. I know that's not a lot of money, but to date we've awarded 10 businesses with these matching funds, and it has helped with awnings, painting, signage, and more. We had formed a design committee of creative and expert design professionals in our community, and they helped do some of the detail work of this facade renovation plans in order to ensure good and appropriate design and unique, consistent branding for our businesses. This design committee also spent over 150 hours of volunteer time researching and creating our design and style handbook for our downtown business and property owners to use as a resource in the future. We also created a real estate hot sheet that listed current vacancies for downtown buildings that we could provide to potential investors. I sought out contact via phone with all of these potential property owners, with all of the current and potential property owners, and we talked about the resources that were available to them, including the facade grant and meeting with the expert design professionals that Main Street Arkansas keeps on staff. I was able to get a sense of each owner's intention for their building, and internally we created a wish list of uses for these spaces that we were able to start actively pursuing. We also hosted meetings with the professional consultants of Main Street Arkansas that spurred more downtown restoration. As we heard earlier, one of these meetings was with the Arkansas Historic Preservation Tax Credit Coordinator, and a local developer was to be able to begin the first in a series of tax credit projects. These took advantage of our federal and state tax credits to help with projects such as a $750,000 restoration of the Connolly Harrington House, which was the historic building that sustained a devastating fire in 2011. And another was a $1 million restoration of a historic 25,000 square foot building that now houses 5 base floor retail spaces and 3 lofts in the upper floor. Our second strategy was to host events and promotions that would actually bring people into our downtown. In 2014, we were on track to have hosted 80 different event days in our downtown. Some of these are very, very small. Some, of course, are larger. A big part of that is our farmers market, which we host on Tuesdays and Saturdays throughout April through October, as well as a thoughtfully curated calendar of monthly events. In 2012, we started a quarterly downtown shopping event in which 15 to 20 shops stay open late. Another new popular event is our what we call our Dogwood Festival bed races, and teams of 4 or 5 people race original construction beds down our main street. Other events started since 2010 include an Invigorate lunchtime seminar series for downtown stakeholders, a homemade costume contest during our downtown trick-or-treat event, and Kids' Days at the Farmers Market every month during the season of the Farmers Market, as well as a window display contest during the holiday season. These events draw crowds downtown and create reasons for people to come and see what's going on downtown so that they'll come back again and again. This has created a sense of community in our downtown and renewed a sense of vibrancy that has been missing for a long, long time. It's the reason why people like myself are still in our community. I came to Salem Springs thinking that I wouldn't stay for very long, but here I am almost 10 years later, and I love this town. It's my hometown. When we're not the only people that have noticed, in 2012, Smithsonian Magazine called Salem Springs one of the best small towns in America, and in July of this year, Parade Magazine included us in a voting contest for 16 best main streets in America. We obviously don't have the biggest main street, we don't have the most restaurants, But we do have people that love our community, and because that was a voting contest, we were able to activate our community and our community's community and friends of those people and aunts and uncles and cousins all around the United States, and we were able to get into the top 4 of that contest. As much as it has been done, we still have so much work to do. The movement that has been started in Siloam Springs happened quickly and it happened fast, and we now need to sustain that movement over time. So we're trying to follow many of the trends that Patrice has been talking about to sustain the movement that has been created and make sure that our businesses can continue to thrive. We're so grateful to be part of the Main Street program because it has empowered us to do our work, and it has given us a framework from which we can continue to operate. We continue to look towards other award-winning communities in the state. We would love to be the 3rd GAMSA winner in Arkansas. We have some work to do. One of our big projects that we're working on right now is we started and completed the Downtown and Connectivity Master Plan, which is providing a 5 to 7 year framework for the future for us for continued improvements to our downtown. We're working a lot with bike infrastructure, how to make the trail system connect through our downtown, and to make our community events things that are truly accessible to everyone in our community. Thank you so much for letting me tell our story about how Main Street Arkansas and the Main Street program has made a tremendous impact in Siloam Springs, Arkansas.
Wow. I need some rest after all that. My goodness. Thank you, and thank you, Patrice, and Greg, and Meredith. We have a few minutes for questions, if anybody has. Yes.
Hi. It's not a question, but for Greg, he mentioned about 360 jobs, no, businesses in downtown, and as city director of Ward 1, I would like for you to give me that list. Not today, but my email is on the website.
Thank you, Director Hendricks. We appreciate you being here today. Yes.
Meredith, I'm curious as to what is the percentage of the public and private financing that goes in the organization, and what is your pitch to your corporate sponsors to sponsor Main Street?
Here's Nicola.
That's a great question. Actually, right now, we do not receive any contractual city funds. We have presented a contract to our city for consideration. So right now, we are 100% funded by private donations and by our event sponsorships and grant funding that we apply for. And we are blessed to have several companies that are very strong and stable in Siloam Springs that see the value of our downtown development for attracting staff and new talent into their organizations. So that was a huge help when we were getting started, but we've now, through our event calendar, been able to develop a compelling sort of calendar of events and event sponsorships. So some of our event sponsorships are now up to $5,000, $6,000 for the presenting sponsor, and that makes up about 30% of our budget is those high dollar event sponsorships. We also have a really active membership program, so our downtown businesses have been extremely helpful in stepping up and seeing the value of our work. Our Downtown and Connectivity Master Plan was a $150,000 project, and a good portion of that was a private foundation that funded that with then $35,000 of matching funds from our city.
Thank you. Two back here.
Thank you. I know that around the country with a lot of, I guess, the revitalization efforts going around in larger cities, we see a big shift to gentrification where more lower income residents are pushed out in favor of more affluent people. And I was just wondering if in small towns, do you see that same shift?
That's a really good question, and actually I wouldn't have been able to answer that very well a month ago, but one of the questions we asked when we sent out this survey to our network was about issues of gentrification. And now the majority of our network, I would say probably at least 80 to 90%, is smaller smaller cities or rural communities, and there were maybe only 5% or so who reported gentrification as being an issue. So I think, at least based on what I'm seeing, it does tend to be more of an issue in larger urban areas.
Thank you, and right behind you. Yes.
Hello, my name is Catherine. I'm a student here at the Clinton School. Thank you so much for being here. My question was also about gentrification, but more about how you approach that and what your organization does to sort of ensure that the development is equitable.
I tried to give that one to Greg, and he for some reason, he didn't want to answer that. Gentrification, as you know, is an extremely thorny issue, and I think what we see is that there are examples of communities that have handled it in a more sensitive way than others. And one of the ones I would point to that's part of our network is H Street, DC, which is a traditionally African-American neighborhood, very hard hit during the riots in the 60s. You know, some of the street remained intact, but a lot of it was gone. And I think what we've seen there, the organization is led by an African-American gentleman there. His name is Anwar Salim. He is a dynamic, fantastic community leader. I think we've seen a really intense effort to engage the residents of the community, the original residents of the community, to understand what their vision for the neighborhood is and try and connect that as best as possible to the revitalization plans for the area. And you know, there are you all are in, you know, in the public policy business, thinking about or being involved in public service, and there are really important policy measures that can be taken to address gentrification, you know, tax freezes, that sort of thing, to make sure that you're really minimizing the displacement of a community's residents.